Hey everybody, welcome back. Andrew Fantasia here, and it's time for another review marathon. This is our 13th one. I don't want any bad luck, so let's just breeze right through this. If you're new to this, welcome. If you've never seen a review marathon before, here's how they work. Every 3 months, I give myself a challenge where I have to watch as many movies as possible that I've never seen before, but the movies have to be at least a year old by the time I watch them. Most of these are well over a year old. And then I make a video where I talk about all of them and review them as fast as I possibly can. Last time on Review Marathon 12, it was a little bit scant. We only had 26. This time, I managed to squeeze in 10 more. We're talking 36 movies today that I saw between the months of January and April 2024. The year is off to a good start. I got to see a lot of good stuff. As usually happens with these, there tends to be a theme or a trend with the films I end up watching, and you'll notice this time around there's definitely two big trends. Those trends are fantasy and ninjas. Okay, why that? It's random, I know. But I saw this great YouTube video called Shinobi-geddon, and it was all about the influence of ninja and ninja culture on American cinema in the very early 80s, and how the rest of that decade became permeated with just ninja stuff, and they became the hottest thing ever, and now you just don't hear about ninja anymore at all. So I got obsessed with that. I went down a giant ninja rabbit hole, and I went down a big fantasy rabbit hole, and you're going to see that reflected in the movies we watch. So without further ado, we've got 36 movies to get through. Let's review them as fast as we possibly can. Here we go. 47 Ronin. Well, to kick things off, here are a bunch of Ronin. 47 of them, in fact, and Keanu Reeves is one of them. And Hiroyuki Sanada is their leader. And this is good, clean, cheesy fun. It's based on an actual historical event, except they chose to embellish it with a lot of fantasy aspects like witches and demons. As a guy who wants fantasy hooked to his veins on a constant basis, I found these the most delightful parts of the movie. Without them, it's still fine. It would just feel like a B-grade Kurosawa clone. 2010, the year we make contact. 2001 was a cultural game changer. It's very, very hard to follow up a cultural game changer. Just ask Mannequin 2 on the Move. But after taking the plunge with this sequel, I can conclude that it is a damn riveting piece of work. I think it serves as such a great companion piece to the original. They're two very different animals. 2001 is more experimental and enigmatic, while 2010 opts to be more accessible without compromising its own integrity. But the storyline flows so well from one to the other that this sequel makes the original, somehow, even better by association. This might be one of the straight-up coolest sci-fis I have ever watched. Amazons. For some reason, I started riding a wave of Roger Corman fantasy movies because the 80s were full of them, and goddammit, I love fantasy so much. Some of them were so terrible, they were great. Others were legitimately great. But Amazons was the worst offender because it was just plain boring. It had a few standout moments of unexpectedly cheesy effects that got a good laugh out of me, but other than that, it was just a drab softcore porn with swords. I guess if you're really keen on seeing 13 nipples in one night, then Amazons is the movie for you, you weirdo. American Ninja. When the title is an oxymoron, you know it's going to be either spectacular or a spectacular mess. Unfortunately, this was neither. American Ninja is just about a bland dude serving in the military who's also really, really good at ninjutsu. I get that the filmmakers were cashing in on the huge ninja craze that was sweeping mid-80s America, but I think they made every wrong choice. The whole thing is set at a drab military base in the Philippines, so it's dull as dishwater to look at. If you're going to call your movie American Ninja, why not go all out and have a ninja running around the streets of Chicago or something? This was pretty lame, Millhouse. American Ninja 2, The Confrontation. This is a better outing than the first. The two leads feel like they're having fun, and the whole thing feels like a D-tier James Bond movie. The drab military setting has even been replaced with a Caribbean island and a villainous lair that looks like it was built by Ken Adam himself. The most charismatic actor from the first movie by far was Steve James as Corporal Curtis Jackson, and he's back, thank God, to add some life to things. I love that they chose to go with The Confrontation as a subtitle. These movies are full of confrontations. They are about ninjas. Please be more specific. American Ninja 3 Blood Hunt. Okay, the main character from the first two is gone, replaced by another bland white dude who's really, really good at ninjutsu. This guy saw his father gunned down by mobsters as a kid, but in a bizarre twist, the plot of the film has nothing to do with him getting revenge. At least, I don't think it does. The plot involved some kind of bioengineered disease and antidotes on top of all the ninja stuff, so it wasn't exactly easy to grasp. Steve James is back again, though, so that's a plus. And once again, the title is baffling because I'm pretty sure not a drop of blood is ever hunted at any point here. American Ninja 4, The Annihilation. And alas, Steve James is gone. Now we're stuck with the main character from Part 3 who faces off against another stock villain until halfway through the film he gets captured, and in an actual delightful surprise, the main character from Parts 1 and 2 returns and gallops to the rescue on a horse made of pure stoicism. So now you get two American ninjas. And they act like they're old friends, even though we've never actually seen these characters meet before. There are lots of color-coded ninjas, though, and color-coded things boost my serotonin in ways I can't properly describe. I think my biggest gripe is that we've spent 4 films on beaches and islands. With a title like American Ninja, I want to see ninjas sneaking through Central Park, or sword fighting on top of the Sears Tower. At this point, they may as well have just called these movies White Guys in Jungles. Battle Royale. The early 2000s were a wild time, man. Nah, I'm kidding. They were a pretty average time. But they gave us some pretty wild movies, Battle Royale being one of them. This was a cool one, but at times you could really tell you were watching something adapted from a book, because it feels like there's a lot of useful information happening in the margins that you never get to see. More time spent with some of the secondary characters would have helped. I literally hate to say this because I'm a movie guy and I hate what streaming has done to the movie industry, but this may be better as a miniseries than as a film. Also, I hear in America, it's called Battle Quarter Pounder. Brothers from the Walled City. Okay, so there's this place that used to exist in the greater Hong Kong area called Kowloon Walled City, and I've been obsessed with it ever since I learned it existed. When you get a chance, look it up. It's wild. It doesn't exist anymore, but footage of it still exists in some films, including this one. Brothers from the Walled City is a very obscure Shaw Brothers picture, so hard to find that I had to watch it on YouTube without subtitles, which is actually kind of a fun exercise in the universal language of storytelling. Even though I can't speak Cantonese, I understood pretty much 95% of what was going on here. It's such a cool little microcosm of what life in Kowloon was like, and I'm so glad it exists. And it's not the only Walled City film on today's list. Clear and Present Danger. I've never seen a Jack Ryan anything because, to be brutally honest, Tom Clancy feels very different ways about the US military than I do. But this was on Prime Video, so I gave it a watch, and it was serviceable. Yep, that was a military joke. Come at me, Clancy. I do appreciate that Harrison Ford's portrayal was not what I expected. His Jack Ryan is actually a sweet, soft-spoken, kind of nervous guy who's just trying to do the right thing. It's infinitely more interesting than the rah rah, I'm a perfect soldier man, America assumption that I had foolishly made beforehand. And all of the danger in this motion picture was indeed present and clear, so bonus points for that. Crime Story. A quasi-remake of Jackie Chan's successful Police Story series. Crime Story opts for a less comedic and more serious approach. It's still loads of fun, though. It's hard not to have fun with Jackie Chan. And this one's based on a pretty neat true story / conspiracy theory about the disappearance of Chinese businessman Teddy Wang. But most important of all, the climax was filmed in Kowloon Walled City, just before the place was demolished in real life. So, not only does Crime Story give us more Kowloon goodness, it's probably some of the last footage of that place to have ever been recorded. And seriously, go look up Kowloon Walled City. It's like a dystopian movie come to life. Deathstalker 3. The first 2 Deathstalker films are pure sword and sorcery camp, and I love them. Deathstalker 2 especially has an absolutely bangin' theme song that has no right to go so hard. There are 2 more sequels, but they are notoriously hard to find. Luckily, I managed to track down Part 3, and now here we are. There's a 3rd actor playing the titular Deathstalker, and I wasn't sure I was going to like him, but He did a fine job. He was a charismatic ass with a shit-eating grin just like in part 2, so it's consistent if nothing else. This is an overall bland movie with not a lot of action or spectacle, but it doesn't overstay its welcome, and it keeps you charmed and amused the whole time. Disclosure. Folks, please watch Disclosure. It is so bananas. It doesn't know if it wants to be a legal drama or a corporate thriller or a cutting-edge science fiction, so it tries to be all of them and then it falls short of being any of them. If you love your villains being maliciously evil with absolutely zero clear motivation, this is the movie for you. Seriously. I've seen plenty of stories where the villains have questionable, maybe even ridiculous motivation, but Disclosure's villains have literally no reason to be doing what they're doing. None. Zilch. It's a miracle. You have to try to make something like that happen. So come on, watch Disclosure. Treat yourself. Dungeons & Dragons: Wrath of the Dragon God. The original 2000 Dungeons & Dragons movie is fun, but my god is it ever a steaming pile. This is its sequel, a direct-to-TV Sci-Fi Channel original. If that combination of words I just said made any sense to you, you probably have a pretty good idea what to expect here. Except here's the thing. You're wrong. With less than half the budget, Dungeons & Dragons: Wrath of the Dragon God manages to outdo its predecessor in every imaginable way. That was a pretty low bar, but still, the acting, the writing, and even the special effects managed to outpace the original. I've been pleasantly surprised by films before, but this was like being hit by the world's most pleasant bus. It's literally one of the most competent fantasy movies I've ever watched. Enter the Ninja. Yeah, like I said, this list is a little ninja heavy. See, I was in the mood for the American Ninja craze of the 80s, and from what I'd heard, this piece of work is what kicked that off. Seriously, Enter the Ninja's success is what eventually gave us American Ninja, the Ninja Turtles, and countless others. It's one of the most influential movies of the 1980s, period. I was a little bummed that the main hero is a white guy, but the villains were so much fun I forgot all about it in minutes. One of them is a German guy with a hook for a hand, and well, all of his scenes really speak for themselves. You just have to see it. By the time we were halfway through, I had sunk into this cheese like it was quicksand, and I had a great time. But then along came its sequel, Revenge of the Ninja. And this was so goddamn fun that now I'm terribly angry with myself for never having watched it before. There were so many moments in Revenge of the Ninja where my jaw was on the floor, where I was seeing something I had never seen and never imagined to see. This flick makes so many wild choices. Halfway through, it becomes an Italian mafia movie with a whole slew of new characters to keep track of. There's a sumo wrestler whose presence is the most superfluous thing you will ever see. And then there's the fight on the playground, where a certain shot had me laughing so hard I almost spit my water out. I adore this. 5 stars on Letterboxd. Now on to part 3. Ninja 3, The Domination. Wow. Wow, wow. Okay, so take all of the wacky fun of the first 2, except now add demonic possession. An evil ninja, whose motivations and endgame are never made clear, gets gunned down by California police. With his dying breath, he passes his soul into the body of a young woman who also happens to be an aerobics teacher and a city electrician. She's a nice lady, but every once in a while, the evil ninja's ghost takes control of her and makes her murder things. She also lives inside what appears to be an abandoned warehouse, and she has a spinning rooftop vent atop her fridge. I need this trilogy on Blu-ray, like, tomorrow. Excalibur. Sadly, it wasn't until I first read Ready Player One that I learned there was an 80s King Arthur movie that I'd been missing out on. It's taken over 12 years, but I finally got to pull this sword from the stone, and I really dig it. It's more surreal than I expected, but not to its detriment like something like Legend. And man, if this was given a modern-day Lord of the Rings quality trilogy treatment, you could really have something special here. But in a relatively breezy runtime, Excalibur hits a lot of the major notes of Arthur and Merlin's story. Now, I want more. Foxy Brown. If you ever have a hankering to play 1970s cliché bingo, then all aboard the Foxy Brown Express. It's the kind of classic blaxploitation film that's positively inundated with the benchmarks of the era, i.e. a lot of people in bell-bottoms saying things like jive and can you dig it, while standing shin-deep in shag carpeting. Foxy Brown's revenge-fueled plot may be basic, but it set a gold standard and has been wildly influential ever since. Its fingerprints are all over Tarantino's work. And yes, I do, in fact, dig it. The Hot Rock. A good old-fashioned heist picture set in good old-fashioned New York. Robert Redford and his wacky friends get hired to steal a diamond by one of the coolest characters I've seen in a long time, but everything keeps going wrong and hilarity ensues. This one ended a little more abruptly than it should have, but that's the 1970s for you. That decade never met a denouement it liked. I, however, liked this a bunch, and I would recommend The Hot Rock to everyone, film buffs and jewel thieves alike. It should happen to you. This is my first time seeing Judy Holliday in anything, and she's hilarious. Unfortunately, she died young. We could have gotten years worth of comic gold from this lady. In It Should Happen to You, she plays a lost soul who buys a billboard with her name on it just because she wants to. She's not advertising anything, she's not starting a business. She just likes the idea of seeing her name on a giant sign, and it ends up backfiring, which is why this movie feels like it resonates so well with today's social influencer crowd, because it's about someone becoming ridiculously famous for all the wrong reasons. But it's worth a watch just for her performance alone. The Lord of the Rings, 1978. Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings is a mixed bag. Half of the animation is done with rotoscoping, so it looks a little ugly and washed out. The Fellowship themselves look awesome. They're colorful and expressive, and every single one of them looks like an action figure young Andrew would have given the One Ring to get his mitts on. I wish they had stuck to that lane, and I wish Bakshi would have been able to make his sequel. Instead, we've got an unfinished story that's a bit sludgy to look at. Munchies. I don't even know what to say about this one. A Gremlins clone that knows it's a Gremlins clone, where Harvey Korman runs around in a polyester suit trying to kill little not gremlins, and the whole thing feels like a Mad Magazine parody. When you take a movie like Gremlins, which is already pretty wacky, and try to make it even wackier, well, that's a lot of whack. So much so that it ends up being, as the kids used to say, whack, and not in a good way. I mean, you won't be bored. It's definitely no hobgoblins, though. The Name of the Rose. An Italian man named Umberto Eco wrote a murder mystery set in a medieval abbey. If that's not the most wonderfully wild thing you've ever heard, then brace yourself, because they made a Sean Connery movie out of that. The Name of the Rose actually does a fantastic job adapting a book that, while enjoyable, is admittedly a little on the wordy side. Ron Perlman plays an insane monk who speaks in every language at once. Someone is drowned in a bucket of pig's blood. There's a library constructed like an M.C. Escher labyrinth, and the film's poster was drawn by Drew friggin' Struzan, the best poster artist in film history. I don't even know why you're still listening to me when this movie exists out there somewhere. The New Barbarians. So at some point, a bunch of Italians got together and said, you know what we need to make? A B-grade Mad Max clone. And thus they got together and made the piece of art that is The New Barbarians. The dialogue is pretty ratchet, but if you can get past that, you can have some fun here. Despite the obviously low budget, they managed to craft some pretty cool vehicles and costumes upon which to build their post-apocalyptic world. It's a decent way to kill 85 minutes until Furiosa comes out. New York Ninja. The story of how this movie came to be should be a movie itself. So this was filmed back in 1984, but its distribution company went bankrupt before they could release it. That company, 21st Century Productions, was responsible for a ton of campy 80s goodness, like some of the Lucio Fulci films and the British horror Don't Open Till Christmas. Anyway, after they went bust, all the negative prints for the unfinished New York Ninja were sealed away and forgotten. Until they were discovered in 2020 by the film restoration company Vinegar Syndrome. They had zero audio and no script to reference, so they came up with the most coherent story they could based on the footage they had. They got some actors to come in and dub the dialogue, and they Frankensteined together a functioning movie. It was a project done out of pure love for the art form, and it's one of the coolest making-of stories I've ever heard. As for the movie itself, it's about a ninja running around playing a vigilante on the streets of NYC, which is exactly what I wanted American Ninja to be. So, full points there. Pray for death. A character in this movie does indeed pray for death, so the title is already more accurate than all 4 American Ninja movies combined. This is another Sho Kosugi ninja romp, and it's actually really decent. It's an R-rated revenge tale where a bunch of evil mob guys mess with the wrong family, so our main hero, who was secretly a ninja, cuts a blood-soaked path through their ranks, making them sorry they were ever born. The film's mustache game is also on point. Highly recommend. Runaway Train. I don't know why this movie isn't a bigger deal than it seems to be, considering it's a prison break movie, those always do well, and it's got Jon Voight, Eric Roberts, and Rebecca De Mornay all turning in some award-winning performances. The 80s synth score doesn't always match what's happening on the screen very well, but that's just part of the charm, baby. Anyway, two escaped convicts are stuck on a runaway train with sexy results. Legendary Japanese director Akira Kurosawa came up with the idea for this. What more do you need to hear? Go watch Runaway Train. Skadoo. Kids, there is no such thing as too campy. Take Skadoo, an acid-filled 1960s mafia romp where a bunch of Batman villains make cameos and Groucho Marx is the bad guy, and the whole thing turns into a musical during the last 15 minutes, including a complete song and dance number about garbage cans. No need to rewind. You did not hear me wrong just now. What I really like is how this seems to make fun of both culture and counterculture equally. No one is safe from the sting of its satire. Did I mention all of the closing credits are sung out loud? I need more people to know Skadoo exists. Sorceress. Whoever named this must have been the same confused person who named American Ninja 3 Blood Hunt, because Sorceress does not contain a single sorceress at all. There is a sorcerer and a priestess, and a couple of barbarians, and a goat man, and what I can only describe as some kind of celestial manticore ghost, but no sorceresses. False advertising aside, if you like terribly acted, low-budget 80s fantasy romps, then your search will end with Sorceress, because it is so flawed, it's almost flawless. It's also quite possibly the horniest motion picture I have ever seen. Summertime Switch. Full disclosure, I'm only watching this TV movie because Ryder Strong from Boy Meets World is in it. But 90 minutes later, I walked away delightfully charmed. A troubled kid and a billionaire kid with the same name get on the wrong buses to camp. So the troubled kid ends up at a preppy paradise, while the billionaire kid ends up at juvenile boot camp. And hilarity ensues. And also there's a basketball game at the end because 90s! Man, this was just a great little kids movie with a wonderful message. There's no way I couldn't like it. The Sword and the Sorcerer. Well, it's a lot better than Sorceress, and it actually has a sorcerer in it, so points there. Unfortunately, every woman in The Sword and the Sorcerer is treated as nothing but an object, because fantasy in this era was made by and for very childish men with small penises. This also suffers from 80s terrible protagonist syndrome, which is a totally real thing. See, in this decade, particularly in the fantasy genre, the main heroes were, how can I put this delicately, pieces of shit. They were pieces of human shit. And that's on full display here. Our main quote-unquote hero is a debaucheristic asshole who just growls his way from scene to scene, winning every fight and betting every wench who crosses his path because he the big, strong hero man. It's a shame because the movie is actually really engaging with a lot of lore happening in the background that practically begs for a sequel, or at least a novelization. I like The Sword and the Sorcerer, but I also think everybody who made it owes an apology to women everywhere. The Temp. There's an ending that would have made The Temp outstanding. The writers did not opt for that ending. The film barely even ends. It just stops and cuts to black like it's throwing in the towel. And that's really a bummer because I was neck deep along for the ride for this. It had the potential to be a classic bit of yuppie noir, but it chose to close its curtains with a squeak rather than a flourish. They should have called this The Tepid because that's what it was. The Trouble with Angels. This absolutely charming comedy tells the story of two teenage girls who meet at a Catholic boarding school and become BFFs. They get into trouble on a daily basis and end up butting heads with their strict but well-meaning Mother Superior, and that's about it. Simple but funny and with some truly endearing moments. Nuns are always entertaining. The Vachi Papers. The same year that gave us The Godfather also gave us The Vachi Papers, a Charles Bronson mafia saga about the real-life driver and hitman who revealed the existence of the Italian mafia to the American justice system. It's a pretty darn solid crime drama and one of the few I've ever seen that has an actual kind of happy ending. And the story it tells is a really important one in the history of organized crime. But it came out within 9 months of The Godfather, and I guess there's only room for one boss in this town. Capiche? Zombie Nightmare. Wow, where do I even start with this one? Okay, so some guy with long hair and tight sweatpants gets hit by a car full of punk teenagers and he dies. But his mom is like, Don't worry, I know a witch doctor who owes me a favor, so she gets the local voodoo priestess to bring the guy back as a long-haired, tight-pantsed zombie, and he spends the rest of the movie picking off the teenagers who killed him one by one. And also, Adam West is there as the captain of the police force. I don't know where this movie came from, but thank God it exists. Alright, that's it, we did it! We got through another 36 movies to add to the giant list of stuff that these review marathons have helped me expose myself to. My giant list of movies I want to see is still pushing 700 titles, even though we've probably watched close to 700 with all the review marathons we've done so far. So that goes to show how much this guy was missing out on. I added way too much to my letterbox these past 3 months, and I am okay with it. But hey, if you liked this video and you like me and you think I'm okay and you're subscribed or whatever, maybe even check out my fantasies, which are better than all the ones that we watched today, I promise. We Were Wizards are the fantasy books that I wrote, and you can get them on Amazon right now. If you like hardcover, we got them. If you like paperback, we got them. If you like ebook, we got them. If you like psychic telepathy, where somebody tells you the story via supernatural means, we're working on that. Don't push me. It's a process. Anyway, I've got We Were Wizards on Amazon right now. The first book is this purple one, and the next book in the series is this gray one, and it's already there too. You can get them both right now. It's a classic fantasy adventure story. If you're a fantasy fan, or you have a fantasy fan in your life, or both, We Were Wizards, baby. Check it out. Anyway, that'll do it for today for Review Marathon 13. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I will see you all here next time. And until then, adios.